All right, let's dive right in. We're going to tackle a really fascinating legal puzzle today, one that kind of shapes how the whole world works. So think about it. We have two huge sets of rules. There are the ones for how countries deal with each other, and then there are the ones for how we live our lives inside our own borders. But what happens when those two worlds collide? Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Let's say your country signs some huge international climate treaty. Does that instantly become the law of the land? Does it just automatically beat out any national laws that say something different? Or does it just kind of sit there on a shelf, waiting for your government to actually do something with it? Well, that's what we're here to untangle. Okay, so first things first, we need to meet the two main players in this whole drama: international law and municipal law. You've really got to get the difference between these two because it is the foundation for absolutely everything else we're going to talk about. So you can see here, they're basically two completely different beasts. International law, that's all about the external stuff, how nations interact. It's built on treaties and long-standing customs. But municipal law, national law, that's all internal. It's the domestic stuff that governs our daily lives. So totally different domains, and they come from totally different places.
This is where it gets really interesting and a little messy. It's a question that legal experts have been arguing about for centuries, and all those arguments have basically led to two major and pretty much opposite ways of looking at the world, plus a few more practical, how-to approaches.
First up, let's talk about the monist theory. The easiest way to think about this one is as the one big happy family approach. The idea here is that all law is, well, it's all just law, part of one single connected system. Right. So the core idea of monism is that you don't really have two separate legal systems. Nope. Instead, you've got this one massive, overarching system of law. And it doesn't matter if that law is for a city, a country, or the entire planet. It's all just different branches on the same tree. That's how guys like Kelsen and Dewey saw it. And this right here, this quote gets to the philosophical heart of it all. The argument is, since every single law, big or small, is ultimately made for people, then it has to come from the same basic source. It has to be one coherent system. It's a very human-centric way of looking at the whole legal universe. And here's the rub with monism. On the one hand, it's a beautiful idea, right? It's clean, it's logical. But on the other hand, critics are quick to point out that in the real world, countries just don't act this way. The way things are in practice often looks very different from how they look in this theory. Okay, now let's flip the script completely and jump to the opposite corner. Welcome to dualism. This view sees two totally separate legal universes that are just operating side by side, in parallel. So, according to the big thinkers in this camp, like Triepel and Anzilotti, international and municipal law don't even speak the same language. They have different origins, they deal with different subjects, and you can't just take a rule from one and apply it in the other without some kind of formal act of translation.
Now, the appeal of dualism is that it feels very practical. It often lines up with how countries actually behave. But, and there's always a but, critics have some big problems with it. For one thing, today, international law does apply to individuals all the time. Think about human rights law or war crimes. And it also has a tough time explaining customary international law, all those unwritten rules that nations follow anyway.
So we've got these two grand competing philosophies. But, beyond all that high-level thinking, there are some more practical theories. These aren't about the why, they're about the how. How exactly do you get a global rule to become a local one? How do you actually build that bridge between the two worlds? Think of these next three as less like worldviews and more like instruction manuals. They're just different playbooks that a country can use to bring international law into its own legal system. Let's break them down one by one so it's all crystal clear. So with specific adoption, think of it this way. An international treaty can't just show up and crash on the couch. It needs a formal invitation to the party. A country has to pass its own specific law that says, okay, we are officially adopting the rules of this agreement. The rule is welcomed in as is, with no changes. And India is a perfect real-world example of this. They signed this big international treaty on diplomacy way back in 1961. But did it become the law in India right away? Nope. Not until Parliament passed its own specific act, more than a decade later, in 1972. Same story with the Stockholm Declaration. It led to a separate Indian law on water pollution. It's a clear, direct adoption. Now, transformation theory takes things up a notch. This isn't just an invitation, it's a full-on makeover. The international agreement is the inspiration, sure, but its ideas have to be totally rewritten into the local legal language. It's less of a copy and paste job and more of a complete translation and rebuild to make it fit.
And then there's delegation theory, which is actually a pretty clever way to look at the problem. This one isn't about the how, it's about who decides. It's like international law itself is saying, look, every country, it's up to you. Your own constitution is the ultimate rulebook for how you bring my ideas into your system. So international law basically delegates the power to each country's own constitution to figure it out.
Okay, so we've run through monism, dualism, and 3 different ways to actually get the job done. After all that, I bet you're wondering, so who's right? Which theory actually wins out in the end? And the answer is nobody. There's no single winner. In the real world, different countries do it differently, and that choice usually reflects their own unique history and legal traditions. Some lean more one way, some lean the other. The key thing to remember is that this relationship isn't a fixed, static rule. It's more like a constant, evolving conversation between the global and the local. And that leaves us with one final thing to think about. And it is a big one. This isn't just some abstract legal debate for scholars. It's a fundamental question about how we're governed. How do we balance being a part of the global community with protecting our own national laws and values? How much power should the rest of the world have inside your country's borders? That is a question every single nation and really every citizen is still trying to answer.